Hi guys, I'm Uncle Richie.
Yo, what up? J Money's back.
And this is C10. And you're listening to the Unkles Podcast.
Welcome back to the Unkles, episode 59. Tonight I've got a very special guest, Peter Aitsi, who is also my dad. I'm joined by him tonight, and before we get into it, I thought I'd give you guys a bit of an introduction for those of you who may not know him. So, Peter Aitsi is a prominent business leader in Papua New Guinea with extensive experience across various sectors, including banking, finance, media, and mining. He is the chair of Transparency International PNG, a role in which he actively advocates for transparency and accountability in governance to combat corruption and promote good governance. Professionally, Peter has held significant positions in the corporate sector. He has been a director of the Steamships Trading Company and serves as the chairman of Me Bank PNG and the PNG Property Developers Association. He also holds directorships in several other companies, including Oil Min Holdings and the media company PNG FM. In 2019, Peter was appointed the CEO of Credit Corp Limited, where he was responsible for leading the company through its next stages of growth and overseeing its operations across the Pacific region. He has also been recognized for his contributions to the development of PNG's media industry and his voluntary service to various community organizations, earning him the honor of Member of the British Empire, MBE, in 2004. Most of you know him as a high-profile businessman in Papua New Guinea, but I know him as my dad, my father, someone that I've looked up to my whole life. He's also a loving husband to my mother, and he's done a lot for us over the span of my life and career. So, Dad, just wanted to, bring you on and to also share your experiences. You know, a lot of people know you as a business leader, someone who's worked in various industries for quite some time now, but a lot of them also don't know the story that it took for you to get there. So I wanted to start by just taking everyone back to where it all started. You know, where were you born and raised?
Well, Richard, I was born in Wewak, East Sepik Province, in 1996. And people sort of ask me, what's a person from Kairuku doing being born in Wewak? Well, your grandfather and grandmother ended up in Wewak when my father was a depot manager at Mobil Oil in Wewak. And so it caused myself to be born there. Mm-hmm. I had an older sister. I do have an older sister, Solange Aitsi, and so she was already born. And my mother and father relocated to Wewak, and so I was born at Borum Hospital in Wewak.
Okay, yeah. And do you have many memories of your time that was spent up in Wewak?
Oh, absolutely, some very good memories. We had my father's elder cousin, Chubukwai, or Peter Chubu, the person I was named after, and he had a contract up in Vanimo building government houses. Mm-hmm. So we had that type of connection with the family that already were up there. Mm-hmm. So Dad fitted in fairly well to the local community there, and both Solange and myself used to spend a lot of time on the beach of Wewak, and I think that's probably where my love of the sea and waves and surfing sort of took hold of me when I was in my formative years in Wewak.
Yeah.
So we spent nearly all days, or I did, spend all days on the beach in Wewak as I was growing up.
Yeah. And what was Wewak town like back then?
My memories are it was a lovely place, and the markets and the people were very caring. It was a carefree life in Wewak. It's changed as every part of Papua New Guinea. It's changed because population is growing now. And each of our sort of cities now, each of our towns now are challenged because unfortunately, as the population grows, our ability to provide services for our citizens and our communities is not so good. And so it places a lot of pressure on these communities. So, but in terms of my memories of Wewak, beautiful place.
Yeah. And after Wewak, what was the reason behind you guys leaving, and was it straight to Port Moresby after that?
Yes, we spent a good probably 3 or 4 years in Wewak, and we came back to Port Moresby, and that was a little bit of a shock for me. I started my life speaking Pidgin, so that was really my first language, and then I had to learn English, and so that was another process again in developing. I spent I think just 6 or 7 months at Hagara Primary School at Hanobata.
Yep.
Because at that stage, your grandfather, my father, relocated back to Idubada at the mobile depot there, and we had a house there. And I started going to Hagara school in the early part of my life as well.
Okay. And what was life like back then in Port Moresby?
Oh, it was beautiful. In Port Moresby back in the early sort of 70s now, there was sort of big buses running. Life itself, I think, was very good, and communities were generally peaceful. And so I've got memories of being able to walk from Idubada all the way into town, into Port Moresby, and you'd walk through Hanobata village, you'd walk through what was then Hubert Murray Stadium, where the sea was right up against the stadium. There was only one road there. And it was a very peaceful place to exist.
And how was it for you as a young person growing up back then? Like, what was, I only know Bubu Hano and Bubu Aiba as, my grandparents, because I've only known them for a period of their life, whereas, you had you got to see them when they were quite young and also going through life at that time. So how was that for you? And what were they doing in order to, I guess, try their best to be your parents?
Well, as I said, my father was working for Mobil Oil.
Yep.
And so that allowed him to sort of travel up to Wewak. When he came back, he worked at the depot at Idubada and was responsible for the dispatch and also for the transfer of oil and petroleum that came in via the big ships. So he'd spent a lot of time out on the terminal. Whenever I was home, I'd spend a lot of time in the depot, in the office with him. It was only a small group, but there were people from all over the country. His best mates were from Chimbu, from Morobe, from Kainantu, and that was just the nature of it. Everybody got along well. It didn't matter where you were from, but you developed friendships across different parts of Papua New Guinea because of the kind of, I suppose, environment at that time. It was very open, very peaceful, and people got along.
And moving on from that, I know a few people. You said before that your first language was Pidgin, and then you had to sort of learn English when you moved to Port Moresby. But a lot of people would say that you're a very good speaker now. I think just from watching you and being around you that you're a great, effective communicator. And would you say a lot of that effectiveness came from also having the opportunity to move down south to Melbourne and then go to school? Tell us a bit about that and how that came about, because I know a few people that are listening and watching don't know that bit about you.
Yeah, look, it was a bit of a surprise for everybody, I think, in terms of how I got down there. And my father had gotten to know an Australian gentleman when they worked together when they were here in Port Moresby and then later in Wewak. When I was very young, they made a decision that I would be adopted by this family, and I'd essentially be given the opportunity to go to school in Australia. So that really took me on a journey when I was 6 years old, leaving home. I think it must have been 1973, I think, at that time.
Wow.
Even before independence. And I remember I travelled on a piece of paper, and on the piece of paper it read a citizen of the territory of Papua New Guinea, which was a territory of Australia at the time. We didn't even have a passport.
Wow.
And so I remember carrying on my little bag with John, and we headed off in what was then the TAA airline, which is a Trans-Australian airline at the time, which was an Australian airline that was flying into Port Moresby.
Yeah.
And we arrived into Melbourne, and I've still got memories of Melbourne. It was this dark foreign place, very cold, very cold.
Mm.
And so that was sort of the early memories arriving into Melbourne when I was 6 years old. So that caused me to sort of really adapt to a new world.
Mm.
I'd come out of Wewak, as I said, very just speaking pidgin.
Mm.
I'd gone into Port Moresby, only had a brief time there, starting to learn about different things in Port Moresby, a different language again, in terms of Motu and also in terms of English. I really probably started to get my more formative, introduction into school, probably a formal school system.
Mm.
So to be taken out of that and put into essentially a different world again was a big challenge. And so that was how I found myself down there. And my father and my parents, I think, had a vision that they wanted to give me that opportunity as the only boy in the family. And as a result, that started a journey that took me away from home for a period of 12 years.
Mm. And we talk about it a lot here on the Uncles, and it was the reason why we started the podcast, was because we started having conversations about, our upbringing and some of the challenges that we face with transitioning into a new society, into a new culture. And I think your example is a great example of, someone who back then they wouldn't have, we didn't even have phones or technology, but I can imagine the amount of, not anxiety, but the unknown of, hopping on a plane with a piece of paper and then, going to Melbourne and not knowing who you'll meet. So what was that like for you, and what were the few things that you did along the way to help you transition into Melbourne society or Melbourne culture?
Well, look, I think it's fair to say that, being so young, I had no idea. And so I relied on people that I got to know down there to really become my family. And so the gentleman that took me down was a gentleman called John Smith. And John had his parents, Nellie and Jack Smith. And so I spent a good part of the first 2 or 3 years with Nellie and Jack. They became my grandparents. And I started, and I attended Wonthaggi Primary School and befriended a number of people who are still friends of mine today, who've become sort of lifelong friends as well. And they took me to their families as well. So all the neighbours around in Wonthaggi, all the neighbours that we lived nearby, I was the only black child in that neighbourhood. And so as a result, I was welcome to every house. And so we'd eat at one, eat at another, and then end up back with Nellie and Jack, and they would have no problems about me sort of getting around the place.
Oh.
And so, so that was the sort of formative introduction into that community. And it allowed me to sort of really, to assimilate and to become very comfortable in that kind of environment. And I think it's those experiences that allowed me then to sort of adapt so quickly. And then for me to also, get a real sort of understanding about how we as individuals, how we as communities integrate and interact with each other as well.
And over the span of 12 years, did you get the chance to speak to Bubu and Bubu Hanu and Bubu Aiba over that time? Did you, because I don't know this as well for people that are listening, so it's very much a learning curve for me. That's why I'm asking these questions. But did you go back to PNG over that 12 years?
Look, for the first 3.5 years, I didn't travel back. And it was only in 1976, so sort of 3.5, 4 years later, that I travelled back And at that time, we'd already achieved, got our independence. And so during that time back, I then received my first passport as a Papua New Guinean citizen. So that was the first time I received my passport. For mum and dad, as you said earlier, there was no mobile phones.
Yeah.
So the only way we communicated was through letters.
Wow.
And so they would write to me, I would write to them, and that was the form of communication. And every now and then we had, Dad would ring me, or we'd ring Dad. And so we would be able to talk over the phone. So it was limited. And I must say, those first years were very difficult because you're away from your family and you're on your own, essentially, once again, in a foreign sort of environment. So I think that's one of the things that sort of stayed with it, that possibly gave me, probably made me as independent as I am, and allowed me to sort of to develop those skills that allow you to get through these types of issues. When you're confronted with something that is a challenge to you, you very quickly start to think about, okay, what do I need to do in order for me to overcome these challenges? And how do I draw on my resources, both myself and also externally, to be able to overcome these types of challenges and ensure that, we're able to sort of progress. So I think those early lessons helped shape sort of the way that I approach life now.
And final one before we move on to some questions from some of our followers in Port Moresby. How important was sport or exercise to you in Melbourne? Not only is it important for me socially, but it's also important mentally and physically because you're outside with others, you're speaking to others, learning about them, their life, and you're also doing something that's quite fun and physical. So you're putting your body through, a good thing. So how important was that for you going through high school and in Melbourne?
Oh, look, it's very important because, I must say my life, my journey through that 12-year period was never always smooth. And there were challenges, both in terms of the home environment that I had, but also just in terms of being so far away from your family. But what I found was that there were these, what I would call perhaps areas that you could go to find, comfort, to be able to find a space that allowed you to be you, to be able to find yourself. And one of those was around the various sports that I got involved with, and by that involvement, the kind of friends that I connected with. I played Australian rules football when I was very young. Started when I was probably under 11, under 12, under 13, and we progressed up to under 17 before I went home. But I enjoyed that because what it did was it allowed me to be physical. It allowed me to bond with other friends and mates that I became very close to. And those mates are still very close to me now. And as you know, one of them is the person that I named you after, Richie.
Yeah. Uncle Rick.
Uncle Rick. And so he's been a constant, and they've been a constant through my life, which has allowed me, if you like, a little bit of a safety net. Because everything that you get involved with within your professional life, within your sort of work life, there are a number of things that you must have as what I call anchors in your life, and these are things that keep you protected, keep you safe, keep you sane in some instances. They bring you back to that happy place, and those things are your family, but also those important friends in your life that have continued to sort of provide you that support that allowed you to sort of do the things you do. So in sport, primarily it was Aussie rules in my early days. Around about when we were 14 and 15, we started surfing as a group of friends. And that's probably been the sport that's been constant right through my life. So we started surfing down at a place called Inverloch. We started with one board between 7 of us, I think, at that stage. And then the next summer, we all sort of got our own boards. Then we started to perhaps surf more regularly. And then by the time we were sort of 17, 18, it became very much part of our lives. Just a constant, desire to go to the beach, spend time in the water, and just being in that natural sort of ocean environment with friends that you care and love, and that's what brought us even closer together.
So I've got two questions. First up, what position did you play in AFL? And second one, how cold was the water when you were surfing?
Okay. Well, in terms of AFL, I think I started as a ruck rover in the early years because I was reasonably taller than others.
Yeah.
But then I stopped growing.
And everyone else
kept on growing, so I became a rover.
Yeah.
But I was always fast, and so that was probably my what would you call it, my strength.
Yeah.
I did have some good ball skills, so I was able to sort of be a reasonable player.
Okay.
In terms of surfing, look, in Melbourne, the water is always cold.
Yeah.
Summer or winter. But the good thing, in summer, we didn't have to wear the wetsuits. But in winter, definitely, it's 2 or 3 mil wetsuits. And the water is always very cold, so you need to be really dedicated and keen to get in the water during winter. Yeah.
Oh, that's that ends the what we're going to call this episode the beginning of part 1 with my dad, my father, Peter Aitsi. We hope you enjoyed that one, but that'll just give you an insight into the person he is, growing up in Wewak all the way through to Port Moresby and then on to Melbourne. So do listen in because he'll be back on for part 2 and 3. But now we've got some questions that were sent in by some of our followers in Port Moresby. So the first one we had was from Kaylin, a follower and someone who's been on the podcast previously. But he's asked, it would be good to get Peter's view on the upcoming VONC. Potential VONC is vote of no confidence, which is happening at the moment over in PNG. Potential change in government and his stance on it from a transparency perspective.
Well, that's a very topical question at the moment.
Yeah.
Look, the vote of no confidence is a mechanism that our forefathers put into the Constitution, which enables we citizens to have a voice at a point in time where perhaps a government isn't acting in our interest. And so it is the democratic right, and it's the authority of Parliament to, if you'd like, introduce or to allow a vote of no confidence where there is a requirement there, and if you like, where there is a overwhelming public insistence or public sort of demand for change. And so that's sort of on the basis of the vote of no confidence. In terms of the way that it may play out, ultimately it's a game of numbers within Parliament, and really it's for those members of Parliament to really consider what is in the best interest of our country, and to be able to then make a decision on that basis for the best interest of their electorates. And if they do see fit to change the government, then so be it. What concerns Transparency International, though, is the way or the approach that they take to make that change. And so as of today, Transparency International put out a statement just reminding our members of Parliament of their role in this whole exercise, their role in the whole vote of no confidence process, and to ensure that they and members of government, both members of government and opposition, do not misuse public assets or public funds as they engage in the vote of no confidence, and that they abide by the legal framework that's been set up in order for them to be able to reflect the public's, if you like, the demand or the best interest of their constituents as they make their decisions. So in terms of the outcome, once again, it really is a decision for Parliament to make. What Transparency International will call for is for all parties, including our elected leaders and our bureaucrats, to ensure that they follow the legal process and abide by the legal framework that's in place to serve the interest of our public.
Mm-hmm. Great answer, Caitlin. There you go. So next up, Palsy asked, Palsy is also in Port Moresby. He said, it would be good to know what you think we should as a country need to do to get our economy back to a stable place. Realistically, where are we at the moment? And what direction would we have to move towards to try and stabilize the economy?
That's a big question. Hopefully we've got enough minutes to answer. But in short, we need to get our economy kick-started again. And that requires perhaps our government to think about some of the policies that they perhaps have been driving over the last 10, 15 years. We need to stimulate the economy by bringing in investment, both foreign investment, which will then kickstart the domestic investment that's required. One of the biggest problems we face, as I mentioned earlier, is the growing population. And in that population, the demographics tells us that we have a high number of young people in that demographic. We're talking about, I think figures are suggesting up to 50 or 60% are under the age of 25. Our schools are pumping out 80,000 graduates, I think. School leavers are a bit different, but graduates, 80,000. Mm-hmm. And really, from the numbers given by the Employers Federation, we only are able to employ 5,000 of those graduates. Now you can see that, I mean, those numbers alone tells us we're on a pathway of significant risk if we cannot generate enough jobs for these young people. And so that really needs to be the focus of government. The other thing we always try and just remind the government, if we look at the government as a business, its major source of income is taxes. And if you break down the taxes further, the major component of those taxes is salaries and wages tax. And what are salaries and wages taxes collected from? Jobs, employment. So it worries me that the government has over the years put forward policies that are anti-investment, when we know for a fact that if we opened our investments up to major foreign investors, we would be able to bring in capital that will create these jobs and be able to start to absorb some of these school leavers. I think generally people in our communities know the impacts of, lack of employment, lack of opportunities for our young people. And it generally translates into significant law and order problems for us. Children getting involved or youth getting involved in alcohol, drugs, not being gainfully engaged in our societies. And as a result, we see increasing law and order. And that further compounds our ability to attract tourists, and further compounds our problem to attract bona fide investment companies into our country to be able to create more jobs. So it's a vicious circle that we need to try and break.
Okay. Last question. So this one's from Billy in Port Moresby as well. It's a two-part question, actually. He said, as a man who didn't go to uni in your earlier years, what were you able to do personally that allowed you to get this far? So having held some very prominent positions, which I touched on at the start of the episode, what are some of the pointers for young Papua New Guineans who don't have the opportunity to go to uni? And I think great timing with that question, because you just mentioned there, the alarming number of people or young Papua New Guineans who are graduating. What is something, to Billy's question, that they can do to better themselves?
Sure. Look, I think the first thing is, as I found is after you finish your high school, you've got to continue to look for those avenues to develop yourself. I was fortunate to go to the Finance and Banking Institute, which allowed me a pathway or a career in finance and banking. And so that was the first area that I was able to grow my understanding and expertise in a particular field. After that, depending on where you want to go in terms of your life, you then need to try and expose yourself to a couple of things. One, perhaps institutions that can allow you to continue to learn and develop your professional sort of understanding of particular industries or particular areas or fields. But the other is to also look to try and associate yourself with peers, with individuals that are pushing your ability to actually learn and understand issues that are around you. So as a result of that interaction, you're able to draw an expertise on their experience as well. The third, I think, most important one, once you've got that sort of network of peers and what I would call influences around you, the third is to try and associate yourself, or to try and perhaps be engaged or involved with mentors. And these are individuals that perhaps you may not know within your own circles of friends, but individuals that you hold in high esteem, and individuals that perhaps have been successful in their own right in whatever field that they've chosen. And you look to try and secure some sort of relationship with those individuals, and if you're genuine enough, and if they are also, if they're also responsive. By that I mean, if they understand, if they look at you and they say there's somebody that's worth investing time in, and they take you under their wing, that is probably the most powerful tool for you, because you have a real life. You learn from real life lessons. You draw on individuals that can provide you direct understanding of experiences that they've gone through. And the other thing they do is they provide you with a support, perhaps support for your own career development. So because you develop that kind of relationship with these mentors, they do introductions on your behalf, and all of a sudden your network of contacts, your circle of influence is multiplied again. And so I think these are the sort of key things. Firstly, don't allow sort of where you finish your school as being the end point. Always start to look for those institutions, look for those opportunities that allow you to develop further your own sort of education, your own sort of understanding of issues. Two, look to associate yourself with peers that are pushing you as well. They continue to push you in terms of your ability to grow as an individual. And number three, try and look for those types of mentors that hold similar values, that have like mind to you, or perhaps have values and principles that you aspire to be. Try to secure their support for your own sort of development. So those are the three key things I think have caused me to perhaps to have a successful career.
Well, there you go, guys. Hope you got all the answers you needed to your questions. But that wraps up part one with Peter Aitsi. Just wanted to say a big thank you from the uncles for giving us the time to have you on and share some of your experience. I know we really want to get you on again down the future to share a bit more about when you left high school and the transition back into PNG. So make sure you follow, stay tuned for that one. But thank you, Dad, for hopping on.
Thank you very much, Rick.